And hello, welcome to the Pioneering Modern podcast. It's the very first episode. My name is Joe and I'm from Snake Eyes MTG. I'm here with two of my closest friends. I have Antog and I have Scratch. Welcome, guys.
Howdy.
Hello.
Howdy. Alright, so today, seeing as it's a first for all of us, we're going to introduce ourselves, I think, a little bit. What do you think? Antog.
So I'm Antog. I am a modern Magic the Gathering online streamer on Twitch. Um, Played Magic oof, many moons, many moons, 20 plus years. Seen a lot of sets come and go, but modern is my favorite format. Lots because of the nostalgia effect.
Nice, fantastic. And Scratch?
Yeah, I mainly play Modern, dabble my feet into a bit of Legacy and also some Pioneer. I mainly just play control decks, sometimes combo control, but if it doesn't have counterspell in the deck, I'm not picking it up.
When did you first start playing Magic?
I myself started playing at M20, um, and
M20. Oh, okay, I remember M20. Like, yeah, okay. So, like, for me, that was quite well into my sort of, time playing Magic. Now, so for you, how did you end up playing Modern? Why not play, why didn't you start off with Standard?
I myself never started off with Standard because I just don't dislike the idea of having a deck that just is not going to be playable within 2 years. Even if I do change my deck, you know, with not every release, but with every couple of releases, the decks do get adjusted in
Mm.
order to use the newest cards that have, better effects. But because Standard has this artificial way of saying after X years, maybe it gets a reprint at some point during the Standard lifetime, and after 3 years, one of my favorite cards is just not playable. I just never bothered to pick up Standard, and
Yeah.
Pioneer wasn't far off of being launched at that point.
Yeah, I mean, Pioneer is relatively new, isn't it? So, like, you know, I it kind of Pioneer was it's a weird one because Pioneer came out and then of course we went through the pandemic and it kind of just died off. And I mean, I don't know about you, but I kind of thought it would just end up like, um, oh, do you know, it's
Frontier.
Frontier. That's it. Um, but yeah, so how about you, Anthony? What for you? When did you start playing?
Oh, oof. My earliest Magic memory is going downstairs to the card shop from my father's plastic hobby shop
Mm-hmm.
and buying a pack of Arabian Nights.
Arabian Nights. Okay, you've been playing a lot longer than myself,
I
and
oof,
obviously
I was very
Scratch.
young, so like I still
Yeah.
had no idea what I was doing, and honestly, I didn't really get a full grasp of how to push myself to the next level of Magic play until Invasion. Um,
Fair enough.
yeah, before
So like,
then, I was doing mostly just hanging out with the friends, pack of cards, eventually get a starter deck, Shivan Dragons, no sleeves, all that
yeah,
sorts of stuff.
no,
Terrible trades
no,
for dual lands. I don't. Oof.
yeah,
Um,
yeah, fair enough. No, nice, right, lovely. So obviously, as I mentioned, I'm Joe. For me, mid range and aggro are the name of the game for me. So we all have relatively different styles. Probably Antog and Scratch are more similar than myself, but yeah, like draw go isn't really my thing.
mm,
um, for me, it was my you know like I first started playing kitchen table when I was in middle school. So that for me would have been around sort of the first round of Kamigawa. So I think either Betrayers or something like that. And I but my first sort of branch into magic properly was when I was at university, and I think about then it was Dissension perhaps, or I can't remember. I think it was actually it might have been. Well, it was 20. Let's think. No. 2008, 2009 that I first kind of looked at, Magic as something more than just, something to do over my lunch break, at school. Um, but yeah, so for me, I I was kind of the same as Scratch. I never looked at Standard because I didn't like the idea of like any card that I buy becoming completely irrelevant, And being a student at the time, I didn't like the idea that I couldn't recoup some of the money that I'd my student loan. I couldn't recoup some of the money that I'd spent on the cards, and yeah. So for me, I just kind of bit the bullet and bought into modern a bit. But yeah, so today we've got a few things that we are going to focus on. Obviously, pioneering modern. Most of the things that we're going to be talking about on this podcast are to do with pioneer and modern. So, to start us off, we're going to talk a little bit about modern and how it differs as a format from pioneer and from standard. Um, so, Antog, what do you think? What what for you uh, sort of characterises modern, um, comparing it to the other formats?
Well, I just highlighted, if you can see between myself and Scratch, the number one reason modern differs from pretty much any other format outside of older formats, and that is the fetch lands. We got 10 of those. We got an enemy cycle, which is colors that don't normally go together, and then we got an allied cycle, colors that enjoy hanging out together. Full 10 set. They are a little expensive. Honestly, though, I've done a little price research, and they are, at least the Scalding Tarn cycle, is at its lowest price since they were in standard.
Yeah, they
And
are coming down, aren't they? It is nice to see.
yeah, and
I
they
do
they
like.
still are a fairly large barrier of entry, though. So
Yeah,
I think later on we're going to touch on some ways you can avoid that, decks you can play, so that you don't have to have this initial barrier of entry. But the mana base is generally the place to start when you're collecting a new format. Um,
yeah,
the fetch lands lead into things like the shock lands, which a whole nother set of those. But we also get those in Pioneer, so they're not quite a huge difference maker for modern versus other formats, which is why
yeah,
the fetch lands stick out to me as a major point of difference between it and other formats.
yeah. So, how about you, Scratch? Do you like have any sort of experience in terms of you know, uh, what's your kind of take on the differences between Pioneer, Standard, Modern?
Well, yeah, I think the first one, the most obvious one we could name about standard versus pioneer and modern is the fact that standard has a rotation about every 2 years,
Mm-hmm.
and in that rotation sets fall out, so that means there is an artificial way about how the deck that you're playing is playable, whilst in Pioneer and in Modern, unless a card gets banned, you are still technically or physically able to play the deck. It might just not be as good as it once was. Also, when it
Yeah,
comes to the two formats, Modern is a bit more efficient in the sense that the cards for a lower mana cost provide much more value in comparison
yeah.
to Pioneer, which is a bit more efficient than Standard.
Mm, why don't you give us a few examples?
I feel like the best one that you could name is definitely within the red color, the one mana red card Lightning Bolt, which does 3 damage to any target. You cannot find any effect within Pioneer or Standard that has the same efficiency. Lightning Bolt hits planeswalkers, it hits creatures, it hits players, it hits anything you need it to hit. While it's being at 1 mana, it does 3 damage. The Pioneer or Standard version you could kind of compare to would be something like Wild Slash and Pioneer, or you could compare it to what's it called? You could compare it to Shock within Standard, which usually has its play in Standard. But those two cards are a lot less efficient in the sense that they only deal 2 damage for 1 red mana, whilst Lightning Bolt is able to deal 3.
Archmage Charm comes to mind as one of the other cards that has recently been freed up as a card seeing more play thanks to Luris no longer being in the format. Um, it's it's an interesting card in that it has so many different options, and the decks that were playing Luris can use those options to bridge that gap from the B part of the game into the C part of the game where they're closing out and finishing up. Um, since the format is hyper efficient, the snatching a one mana cost permanent or less is really good. Um,
Yeah.
like Ragavan, Dragon's Rage Channeler, Urza's Saga tokens. Um,
Yeah.
I've stolen
Basically,
equipment with this.
Yeah, this card is. I did take very long to actually notice the power behind it. I always thought a 3 mana counterspell seemed bad, but the important part about
mm,
this spell is you never really use it as a counterspell unless you have to. The
yeah,
card is just a value machine for 3 mana. I mean, if you look at it, draw 2 cards, always a good one. You could also gain control of a permanent, which is also a 2 for 1. So either of those two options are just 2 for 1. So you're just basically bearing your opponent in the card advantage engine
yeah.
of the game. And
Like,
if need be, you also have the ability to counter a very key threat of your opponent.
yeah. Like I remember when Modern Horizons first came out. Um, I do remember like most people barely gave Archmage's Charm a second look. Um, it was kind of the same as Season Pyromancer. Season Pyromancer, you know, uh, 3 mana, 2/2 enters the battlefield, and you discard 2 cards, draw 2 cards, and for every non-land card that you discard, you can make a 1/1 elemental. And I remember when that card came out, it didn't really like it didn't capture the hearts and minds of people that were playing at the time. And it was only later on when it got tested. I think the first deck I saw it being tested in was Jund. People were kind of raving about it there, but even then, people were going, "Oh, it's double red." Double red and Jund is difficult, and so it was only ever played as a one of or a two of. There are quite a few cards from Modern Horizons that kind of no one saw the value of some of them until a lot later, I think.
Yeah, I think one of the reasons so much shine was left off of Archmage Charm is because of in the same set we had Force of Negation. So everyone was super hyped
Yeah,
about getting a force cycle in
yeah,
modern. Free spells have historically been broken. Anything with Phyrexian mana, you just look at that, get Taxi and Probe, looking at you, Gut Shot,
and
those
anything
sorts of.
free.
Yeah, yeah. Anything free deserves a second look. As really, really,
Yeah,
um,
um,
which is another nod to the invocation cycle. Subtlety and solitude, fury,
yeah,
those sorts of creatures being free are
yeah. So
absolutely a defining part of modern right now.
yeah, so this one, Fury, this is one of my favorites. So the deck that I have had the most success with in recent times is Ponza midrange, and the basic idea of Ponza is to grind your opponent out by interrupting their mana, and then swinging in with some very big creatures. And Fury is one of them because there aren't that many decks these days that can afford such a high mana cost of 5 um, really easily. So many strategies they play it as a sideboard card purely for the evoke effect, whereas Pons is able to play 4 of them in the main deck and cast them quite comfortably. Um, so this is one of my favourite ones. One of the best Furies I think I've ever played was um, someone playing Yorgmoth, and they had a couple of mana dorks. So mana dorks meaning birds of paradise, ignoble hierarch. They're all 1/1s or 0/1s, creatures, and also he had two undying creatures on the board, and I was able to evoke a fury and then cast endurance, which is the green elemental in that cycle. So I effectively took their combo pieces, undying creatures, and put them onto the bottom of their library, which was really, really satisfying.
Oh yeah, yeah. The one-two punch of any of these incarnations together is like, because I know grief and solitude have been hanging out pretty
Yeah,
well in a lot of really good strategies.
yeah. What's your so from the recent, um, the elemental cycle? Um, what's been in your eyes your favourite, and what's been the best?
Um, hmm.
So as I said, for me, Fury is my favourite, um, but I think in in terms of the effect it's had on the meta game, I think Solitude has got to be the best.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I have to. Sorry, I have to agree with Joe here in the sense that Solitude, I think, and in a certain sense, Fury as well, because it's kind of made all the one toughness creatures in the format kind of scattered. Tribal decks have been on the decline prior to MH2, but Fury and Solitude basically just being a way to hold up counterspell whilst at the same time dealing with the board has had a huge impact. I think Solitude even more since its ability to just, no matter what it is, it can exile it. Like you can even get an Emrakul when people try to through the breach it and cheat it into play early, which made the deck basically become irrelevant since it's a combo deck that has like 30% of the meta, like not maybe 30%, but like it feels like 10 to 20% of the meta just has an instant answer for it, and the other parts of the meta are just too fast for it. So it's just a really bad time for that deck because of something like Solitude. When it comes
Mm.
to my favorite elemental, I do have to say Subtlety is gonna have to be my number one choice. The ability to just delay your opponent by, countering their first threats or remanding their threats, just to make sure so that when they then start playing their threats, you can just slam down one subtlety after another, because they usually come in pairs if you have enough cantrips and everything, which cantrips are cards where you can draw cards in your library, either that you can have other effects to manipulate them, like scrying, where you can look at the top card and put it on the bottom, but
Yeah,
cantrips allow you to then find the cards you need. And if you have multiple subtleties, most opponents will put the threat they just played back on top and then recast it the following turn. And then if you have an answer or another subtlety, game basically ends on the spot because you just have so much pressure whilst at the same time have been dealt with their turns that you've just basically just taken the game out from under them.
Yeah, and
yeah,
it's definitely not to be overlooked that Subtlety is a fairly beefy body with flying. 3/3 is just that perfect size of not difficult to deal with, but not easy to deal with. 4 mana, you still get it fatal pushed, um,
only just.
but at the same
It's
time, like it's still it provides those grindy decks, much in the same way Solitude does, an over the top answer that doubles as an early game disruption.
yeah,
Something that longer game control decks have wanted and needed in modern for a long time.
yeah. I think subtlety has gotten a kind of a. It's kind of gotten the kind of reputation of not being as good as the rest, which it's unwarranted. Like it's kind of one of those that like it's kind of had the same effect that Force of Negation when it came in. All of the other forces just paled in comparison. but actually it's actually turned out that there's been one in particular, Force of Vigor, that has destroy two target artifact or enchantments that's actually become really really relevant. Um, and Subtlety, it's kind of had that same like problem where it looks to be just worse, but when it actually gets played, it's never truly bad. You know, I think the perfect example of that is in the current iteration of Merfolk. Um, Merfolk being now, generally speaking, mono blue, so they have plenty of pitch cards. It's just absolutely diabolical in that deck. It's incredible. So, Scratch, why don't you tell us a little bit about Pioneer, um, what that format looks like, um, and why can I play Deathrite Shaman in Pioneer?
So
Why is that allowed?
so let's go back on the topic of the fetch lands currently, just because you're asking about the Deathrite Shaman. Because Deathrite Shaman benefits a lot from the fact that it is a mana dork, which is a low-costed creature, usually between 1 and 2 mana, that has the ability to provide you with extra mana in the early game, in order to pump out bigger threats, off curve. So in like on turn two to be able to play a 3 mana card instead of just a 2 mana card.
Yeah,
Deathrite Shaman benefits a lot from the ability to have lands in the graveyard, and because in Pioneer, either your opponent has to mill themselves or mill you in order to get the lands from maybe either hand or battlefield or library into the graveyard, which is basically something that never happens until like a very late point in the game. Deathrite Shaman just doesn't have the mana relevancy. It has the relevancy in the sense of you're able to exile cards from the graveyard with it, but it doesn't
mm,
provide so much value like it does in Modern, because it just doesn't. It's not a threat. When turn one a Deathrite Shaman gets played, it's a threat that you have to take care of, that you have to deal with. Whilst in Pioneer, if your opponent slams turn one Deathrite Shaman, you're just like, okay, yeah, play it. It's just a
it's
1/2
not as
that made.
yeah, it's not as instantly relevant, is it? You know.
Yeah, and when it comes to the overall format of Pioneer, Pioneer has a lot of cards that Modern had. Like, because it starts from Return to Ravnica, you do play a lot of the nicer cards, a lot of the more cheaper cards. Um, One of the more relevant stuff that is missing is some of the removal spells in white, and you could say the counter suite in blue are toned down in the sense of that most of your
Yeah.
counter magic is at starting at 3 mana. The
Mm,
white removal spells aren't just like 1 mana, exile something, or pitch your card to
yeah.
exile something. You could technically say the new card March of Otherworldly Light has had a huge effect on it.
Yeah.
But also one very important thing is, as we've touched on, red doesn't have lightning bolt, and green has a little less efficient creatures than in modern.
Have you got any idea, Anthony, about what deck you would like to build in in Pioneer?
Yeah, I haven't messed with it since the recent or most recent bannings,
Oh right, yeah, okay,
but
yeah. I played it a little bit when it first came out.
yeah.
I will admit that, but in its current iteration, with the way that it is, when it first came out, the card pool was so small in comparison to modern. I just kind of touched on it a little bit, but I'm gonna say that I've never played it just because, as Pioneer is at the moment compared to how it was when it first came out, it's a different format entirely.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah, and that's kind of why I've been reinvesting into it and kind of taking a look at it. The Mana Traders series this month is actually Pioneer, and I think over
Yeah,
the next, I may try to sneak in some games. I actually don't think I'm going to be able to get any games in for that, but it has reinvigorated my interest in
yeah.
Pioneer, which is important. And
Any idea
the
what you might play?
I've been looking at the Lotus Field combo deck. Um,
Lotus Field.
yeah.
Okay, so what does Lotus Field do?
So essentially, it plays a lot of untapped target effects. And since Lotus Field is a land that taps for 3 mana of a chosen color, and makes
Yeah.
you sacrifice 2 other lands when it comes into play tapped, it does take a little bit of investment to get started. But with cards like Arboreal Grazer and Growth Spiral is not in the format anymore, but Arboreal Grazer being one of the big ones to give us that leg up into our third land drop so that we get that as early as possible.
Yeah.
And it abuses the untap effects like Vizier of the Forgotten Sands. I believe that's the name of it.
I think it's Tumbling
Yeah,
Sand.
the one
Tumbling.
from Twiddle.
Yeah, yeah, Tumbling Sands. So that you can get that untap effect enough to play something like Omniscience or Enter the Infinite, so that you either draw your whole deck or play all of your spells for free so that your mana doesn't even really matter anymore.
Yeah.
There are versions that use Emergent Ultimatum to go get 3 of the best spells in their deck and get to cast 2 of them for free. So there's a couple of different avenues that the deck is exploring that I'm going to look into getting back into the format.
Yeah. So just general combo shenanigans then.
I mean,
between us.
branding.
No,
You gotta stay on brand.
it can only be, can't it, really? But yeah, so I mean, and again, also on brand. Well, actually, no, it's a little bit of a stray away from mid range, but not really. Um, it is and it isn't. It's more of a tempo deck. I'm looking into. Well, I've actually already started purchasing the pieces for. Well, I guess it's. I mean, it's Demir Rogues, but it splashes green for Deathrite Shaman. Um, and I'm really looking forward to playing that. And it plays Deathrite Shaman because generally all of the rogues they like to mill your opponent just a little bit, and that's enough to make Deathrite Shaman more relevant. So I'm really looking forward to playing it. But yeah, the splash for green is just to be able to utilize the Deathrite Shaman's life gain effect. If we were to start playing Modern now, um, would you say it's expensive or would you say it's relatively cheap?
Overall, if you were to ask me, I think Modern is definitely something you can buy into. We have discussed about the fetch lands being a decent chunk of the deck. Usually the fetch lands do cover somewhere between 25 to 50% of, or just the mana base overall, 25 to 50% of the deck. Um, but I feel like overall the ability to buy a lot of cards, if you're not looking to get something like the new elementals like Solitude, and if you're looking to actually be able to maybe play with cards that are slightly worse but still absolutely have power behind them,
Yeah.
you're able to get the cards, like the non-land cards, definitely something that's possible. And the mana base, in my opinion, is absolutely doable. The only thing is, if we can show a Blood Moon, Blood Moon has the effect of affecting non-basic lands to all just be mountains, which Ponza loves to play. And the thing is, Blood Moon affects a lot of the budget mana bases more because without the fetches, you aren't able to as consistently find your non-basic your basics. I meant to say, you're less able to find those basics. But if you accept the fact that Blood Moon is not really a major factor in this format, you're able to play something like the slow lands, the fast lands, the check lands, the pathways, which are a bunch of very cheap to get lands that have the ability to tap for 2 mana, which is very helpful in those decks.
Plays all basics. Just plays all basics. You know,
Merfolk,
costs
basically.
no money and no problem with Blood Moon.
Yeah, there are actually a couple of decks you can kind of push that with, like Merfolk, or there are mono red burn builds that eschew from the white in the mana base to kind of hedge that. Certainly not as explosive as the versions with the mana base. It's a consistency issue. You're not able to hit the right, at least. So if you get access to white in the burn deck, you get things like Boros Charm, Deflecting Palm, a little bit better sideboard, so you're taking a hit, but it's not completely undoable because there are ways to affect those sorts of game zones in just like a mono red burn shell or a mono blue merfolk list that isn't using white or green for the merfolk. And that'll give you a little more consistency on your mana base in certain aspects.
And there are also decks that some people prefer to play a certain version of Storm, for example, that doesn't run fetches.
Yeah. So the fetchless storm deck does that partially as a budget consideration, but also partially as it plays Serum Visions, it plays Consider a lot. So other cards that scry. So whenever you're scrying, you know that card's not going to come up again until you cast Gifts Ungiven.
Yeah.
So knowing when your deck is getting shuffled can be an asset. And if you're playing the Fetchless Storm version, that's definitely something to consider in as far as an entry point when you don't really have the way in with fetches.
Yeah. Okay, so if you like, have you got any ideas on what deck you or what could you give us a selection of decks that you might look at when starting up in modern?
All right, well, I started from Merfolk many moons ago. I was using it as a kind of entry point potentially into Legacy moving forward because at that time the modern deck was very close to what the Legacy Merfolk deck was playing, and there wasn't a Pioneer format. There wasn't even Historic at that point. There just wasn't as many options as far as formats go. So using that as an entry point to Legacy is kind of now using a Pioneer deck as an entry point into Modern. So I would look to decks like Merfolk, I would look to decks like Burn, things like that, that the bulk of the cards are still getting used, still fairly accessible, and since those two things are the case, they're often a little cheaper, supply and demand situations. So Burn is something I'd look at. Merfolk is something I'd look at. But as far as another consideration, you could also look at a deck that you know is going to be around the format for a while. There's nothing too inherently overpowered about it, so that it's not getting a look at the banhammer. It's not so underwhelming that it can't show up and spike a tournament now and then. So, like, one of my considerations for a really good entry point in Modern is the mono green Tron deck.
Right. Yes. So it's interesting that you brought that up, actually, isn't it? Because so today we're actually going to do a little bit of a deck tech for you. Anthony, would you like to lead us off with this one? We're going to be looking at a deck called Mono Green Tron. Now, this is an absolute staple of the format, much to my dismay. I despise this deck with an absolute passion. In my opinion, it's for people that can't count to three. Why do you think that is?
I mean, in my experience, it seems they can count to three pretty quickly because they only need three lands to make
Yeah,
seven
but the
mana.
problem is they go 1, 2, 7. How does that happen? So,
Yeah.
can you please explain to me? Can you please explain to me, or yeah, can you talk us through this deck for
All
us?
right, so right now we've got Urza's Mine on the screen. That is one piece of a 3-land set containing Power Plant, Urza's Power Plant, Urza's Tower, and the one you see now, Urza's Mine. If you are to control one of each of those on the battlefield at the same time, you get an extra mana out of both Urza's Mine and Urza's Power Plant. The key, the way you get to 7, is because Urza's Tower is the one unique one in that it gives 3 instead of the 2 that the other 2 do. So on the back of that, you've got a pretty acceptable near tutor package You play cards like Ancient Stirrings, which you look at the top 5 cards of your library and you put a colorless card from among those into your hand. Um, Fun fact, lands are in fact colorless. So that gives you a solid look at 1 mana. There are also cards like Sylvan Scrying, which allow you to go get that specific land. Many search your deck land situations either put it into play and restrict you to a basic, like Rampant Growth, or just generally restrict what kind of land you can go get. The fetch lands restrict you to an island or two of their specific kinds of basic land types. Sylvan Scrying lets you get any kind of land. So that gives you a more consistent way of finding your combination of 3 lands so that you can do some pretty absurd stuff like powering out Ulamog the Ceaseless Hunger. This is their
Yeah.
top end.
Ugh.
10 mana for 10/10 that exiles 2 permanents when you cast it. Not when it comes
Yeah.
into play.
Just the sight, just as a mid range player, just the sight of this card is petrifying. Oof, you know.
Yeah. I mean, it takes away your 2 most important things going on the battlefield. And if you're a mid range player doing most of your work on the battlefield, that is not a good time. On top of
Yeah.
being a massive 10/10 indestructible creature that has another effect, as if it wasn't already good enough. It exiles the top 20 cards of your opponent's library when you attack them with it.
Yeah.
So, big win condition, but the nuts and bolts that really hold the Tron deck together is Karn Liberated. This is generally the first thing they put onto the battlefield after they've assembled their 3 lands, since it is exactly 7 mana. In much the similar way as Ulamog, it can hit target permanent when it comes into play. If your opponent's kind of at a low resource point, they haven't got very many cards in their hand, the +4 loyalty ability is just good enough to,
Yeah.
probably close the game out in certain situations.
Yeah. I think the biggest thing about this one, what do you think, Scratch? I think the biggest thing about this one is it's so damn hard to remove.
It's definitely one of those threats, which definitely Tron has a very important thing is Tron mulligans pretty aggressively in order to find their lands or their tutor effects to find their lands, because they have incredible threats. Like we have Ulamog there, we have Karn here. These are just threats so powerful that if they can slam them turn 3, turn 4, they just quickly lock you out of the game by just having such
Yeah.
power behind them. I mean, Karn is just it's really hard to
Yeah.
remove once it's on the battlefield, and usually when it comes down turn 3, it can just exile one of your lands, which is super bad for you because you're just sitting there turn 2, may they just be on the play and you're just turn 2, you just got your second land drop, you may have just not had a spell yet, or you did play with something,
Mm.
and they just go be like, yep, you're back at 2 lands now, and your 3 drop in hand
Yeah.
just basically they somewhat get stranded because they just have uh, the total control of your mana base there,
Mm.
which Ulamog also has, and so unless you're playing something like a control deck that actually can counter the thing, as soon as those threats hit the battlefield, you're basically done for.
Yeah. And this is the thing is, as a Ponta player, now you'd think now Ponta happens to play a Blood Moon, which we've mentioned before today. Now, when you're on the play against Tron, um, you're still going to suffer the same problems because if you don't have that turn to play, you just struggle. Because everything in your deck it costs. Apart from the mana package, the mana dorks like Utopia Sprawl and Arbor Elf, you everything in your deck costs 3 mana or more, and if you don't have 3 mana available to you, um, and I specified 3 mana, not 7. Um, uh, if you don't have that 3 mana, you're not going to be doing very much that game at all.
So your point about Blood Moon maybe not even being enough recently, I guess not recently, but few years now, Tron even got more tools and ways to adapt to things like Blood Moon in a different version of Karn, Karn the Great Creator.
Yeah.
So, in
Yeah.
addition to having a big 7 mana Karn, we've got a 4 mana Karn that has the static ability of activated abilities of artifacts your opponents control cannot be activated.
So it's basically just a slowly silence.
There are so many artifacts existing in this format right now. Stoneforge Mystic is at an all-time high in playability. Equipment is everywhere. Hammer Time is a big time deck.
Mm-hmm.
So
There's a brand new um, equipment just come out in NTG New Capenna. Um, it's branded as the new sword.
mm-hmm.
Um, I've forgotten the name. I think it's something gift. Who can help me out here?
It's the one that combos with Dryad, right?
That's right.
Or
Druid.
Druid.
Not Druid. Sorry. Uh, Devoted Druid. Yeah.
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 I can't remember the name of the sword though. All right, I'll tell you what. I'll find it in post production, and we'll make a joke about it afterwards.
Yeah,
It'll be
sure.
great. And we'll just laugh about how none of us can think of the name of this card.
So that's another big one that's going to be coming in. And again, Khan turns elf.
Yeah, and even further to Karn's power level, not only does it have the static ability, it also has two other abilities because all of the planeswalkers in War of the Spark were absurd.
Bonkers. Yeah.
So not only does it turn off artifacts of their opponent's control, it can go and tutor an artifact from your sideboard for a -2 loyalty. So on turn 4, or maybe even sooner since the Tron lands, on turn 3, you can assess the situation. Maybe you're playing an aggro deck across from you and you need to turn off the battlefield. So you -2 after playing Karn, right after assembling Tron, and you go grab Ensnaring Bridge to lock off the battlefield.
Yeah.
Or say maybe your opponent's playing a hyper aggressive low mana cost deck that, like maybe they're playing Storm and they're about to combo off on you. Go get Trinisphere. Solves the problem.
Yeah.
So having access to your sideboard in game 1 is an absolute asset to this deck and will keep this deck relevant moving many years into the future, since it can consistently change what it needs in the sideboard for whatever situation is up.
Yeah. So I remember when this particular card came out. This baby Khan as they call it. I remember when it came out, and I felt very nervous about this card coming out. And as it happened, there was a bit of a combo that you could do with Khan, the Great Creator. We'll talk about that in a minute. But the concept of going to your sideboard and taking a card in game 1 from your sideboard, it was just something that I didn't like. I didn't like. For me, it was like cheating. You know what I mean? And I know there were the wishes from back in the day, but they weren't part of modern, and they were never part of modern. And in my mind, it was like, I mean, we even have a card now called Wish that's in modern, and it's being
standard.
seen more and more. Huh?
It's in standard.
In standard, yeah, it's in standard now. And even before, so after Khan and before Wish, there was the one from Throne of Eldraine. I want to say, I can't remember what it is, but it was another one that was an adventure. Queen, I can't remember the name of it, but you could go into your sideboard and get I think it was
Fae of Wishes, yes.
Fae of Wishes. There we go.
Thank you.
Yeah. So you could go into your sideboard and I think it's get an instant or sorcerer, if I'm not mistaken.
Mm-hmm.
It's a non-creature, non-land card, I think, if I'm not mistaken.
Non-creature, non-land, right? Okay, yeah. So yeah, and so they've just become more and slowly integrated into the game, and so now we're just that's part of modern now. But when Calm was the first of its kind, should we say?
Mm. I
I mean,
also have to say one very important thing about something like Karn over Wish or Fae of Wishes. Fae of Wishes does see play in more in Pioneer than in Modern, but when something like Wish or Fae of Wishes gets played, it's usually somewhere around 2 copies, maybe pushing 3. So somewhere between 1 and 3 copies. Usually the 2 copies is what you see.
Mm.
Karn sees a full playset in most decks that play him, allowing the deck in any game, game 1, game 2, game 3, a full 4 card access to a sideboard slot. Because a lot of times when you sideboard a card in Ghost board, you might have 1 to 2 copies. I mean, sometimes you have more, but
Mm.
a lot of times it's just 1 to 2 copies. Whilst Karn is a full playset, allowing you to have more chances to actually reach an important or critical sideboard card.
Yeah. I think that comes down to again what we were talking about before, card efficiency and card like I always judge a card by how much it can do for the amount of mana it costs, and like mid range decks are all about 2 for 1s, and when a card can do 2 things and you only pay for it once, that's the sign of a good card. Whereas, so when you look at Khan itself, it can do 2 things. In fact, it can do multiple things depending on what you do with it. Um, and you can use it more than once. Whereas Fair of Wishes, um, it's a one-time thing. It's one hit, and it's a 1 for 1. Um, and so just the card quality isn't as good as with Calm.
I would have to disagree a little bit with it because Fae of Wishes does provide you with a card plus its body doing
That
that.
is true.
And
Yeah, actually,
also
that's
Fae of
fair. Yeah,
Wishes for, I think it was 3
yeah,
mana and discarding 2 cards, you can bounce Fae of Wishes
yeah.
back to your hand, allowing you
Yeah.
to have
So
multiple.
that is 2 for 1. So I apologise. You are absolutely
Yeah.
right with that one. Yeah. But I was thinking more like Wish because I rarely ever see Fae of Wishes, But Wish it is something that creeps into modern here and there. In particular, I think with your favourite deck, well, one of your favourite decks, Storm.
good old gift storm. Yeah, Wish is. I love to see how one or two of the standard cards break into modern as a playable card because I think that kind of gives people who are in the newer space of the game a bridge and a look towards those older formats, those eternal formats, and kind of encourages
Yeah.
them to build that collection, investigate the game a little bit more, hopefully getting more people into different formats in the game. So it's cool to see
Yeah.
things like Wish, or even in the example of Tron, which we're talking about, Karn showing up in War of the Spark. It was a standard legal card that
Yeah.
made an impact. I mean, a lot of War of the Spark cards did, but that was how they were pushing the design of that standard set, was to influence those older formats a little bit. And
Yeah. It was a
mm,
very push
mm-hmm.
push set, that one.
I mean,
Anyway, we've kind of gotten a little bit off track with regards to Tron here. So, what's next with regards to Tron in terms of, um, the toolbox that it has available to it? Not necessarily in the sideboard.
Well, so since it has this access to 7 mana early, it can also, besides the Planeswalkers and Ulamog, it can also kind of play a little bit smaller ball. I say small ball, but this is still a 6/6 with Death Touch, Lifelink, and creates 2/3/3 tokens when it dies.
Yeah.
Um, but this card, in the grand scheme of things, in the way Modern looks right now, is easier to deal with than Ulamog or Karn, either version of Karn.
Mhm.
So it is kind of in reference to what Modern's doing, smaller ball than those other cards. Still extremely powerful, extremely hard to deal with. A lot of the hyper aggressive decks have issues dealing with the lifelink that this provides. Um,
Mhm.
and it's just a
And
great way to get some extra reach into those 10 drops that you're looking to get to.
Yeah, and also a lot of modern's removal doesn't really match up. I mean, recently, we've had March of the Other World of Light, which has just come out, um, but it's a big sacrifice.
Oh yeah.
You know, if you want to remove one of these suckers.
There's also the versatility in the removal that this deck provides. Like Oblivion Stone, for example, is a wrath effect that doesn't just hit creatures, it hits all non land permanents. But if you have the time, you can save a couple of your own permanents by putting fate counters on them with this card's second ability. So if you're not pressured, but you're aware that pressure is coming, like say
Yeah,
it's turn 3 and you're playing against some sort of collected company deck, or Yawgmoth is building up and about to go off, but you still have a turn or two, you can put a protection counter on your Karn Great Creator, on your Wormcoil Engine, on your Karn Liberated to protect it from getting swept under the rug with everything else that this Oblivion Stone is going to remove.
I think also the most important thing about this card is that to play it and to crack it, it costs exactly 7 mana.
Mm-hmm. Yep,
So
and that is
it's
the
something.
magic number.
Mm,
Oh, yeah.
it's something that can be thrown down on turn 3. Bearing in mind if you're playing against like a collected company deck, or if you're playing against one of the tribal decks that we've mentioned before, by turn 3, um, they will have gotten 2, 3 creatures down by that point, and turn 3 Tron can just go okay, play O Stone and go. Everything's dead, and we'll start the game again, and that is exactly what happens. Is it's like big reset, um, especially against these creature decks. Um, so watching an watching an affinity player on turn 3 against a Tron deck, affinity with lots of 0 and 1 drops tends to spew out its entire hand by turn 2. And I'm talking all of it. It's all so empty-handed by turn 3. Generally speaking, if they know what they're doing, um, and watching a Tron deck to just go okay, turn 3 Tron land into O Stone. Everything you own except your lands is just gone.
Yep.
Just, and you have to start again with an empty hand. Is generally enough to finish the game off.
And besides the removal, the deck has a lot of what are affectionately known as eggs. One
Mm-hmm.
mana small artifacts that, whenever you crack them, which is the egg
Yeah.
part, they replace themselves. So Chromatic Sphere and Chromatic Star help you get into the points of the game where you're looking for your specific card. Maybe it's a Tron land, maybe you've got Tron, but you're looking for a threat. So these cards kind of also smooth your mana. Since you are Tron and you have those three generic mana producing or colorless mana producing or lands, you need some way to get green mana for Sylvan Scrying and Ancient Stirrings to kind of keep the tutoring effects going. So Chromatic Star and Chromatic Sphere also help out. And something that I'm remiss that I didn't mention earlier that I definitely should have is Expedition Map.
Oh wow, yeah. Did we not mention that?
Yeah,
No, we
I
didn't.
somehow skipped over that, but this is like
Completely went straight
the
over here.
yeah, this is the number one way Tron decks guarantee that they have their third land to finish the
Yeah,
7 mana combo. This
yeah.
on turn 1, opponent doesn't have any interaction. Turn 2, we crack it and we go get whatever land we're missing. Um, I've honestly
Mm.
been looking at this card for a Life from the Loam deck that I've been toying with on the side, so that, especially with all the new Kamigawa lands, you go get your
Oh yeah.
Unsummon, you go get your 2/1/1s, you go get your
Mm.
Disenchant, then you use it,
Yeah.
and then you Life from the Loam it back.
Mm. And also this card particularly does see play in another deck that's only recently been able to be possible thanks to again Modern Horizons 2, and that is the black control deck
Hmm.
as well, which
Yep.
relies on Cabal coffers.
Mm.
Yeah, that deck is an interesting new player in the format that I'm pretty intrigued to see how it
Mm,
affects things.
yeah, I'm
It's
slowly building it myself. So
Yeah, I haven't
I
given it the test run yet. I think this week I'm actually gonna try out the new format on Arena on my stream instead of trying modern or anything like that, just to kind of see what it's like. But
yeah.
um, back to
Is there
Tron.
anything else in Tron that we haven't covered yet?
Well, Sanctum of Ugin is another big thing. Once you finally assemble Tron, you land your Worm Coil engine. I mean, it doesn't trigger off Worm Coil. You land your Karn, the
Um,
Liberated, or your Ugin, and this card, if it's on the battlefield, it's usually your fourth land after you've assembled Tron, and then you'll sacrifice it after you've cast your Karn or your Ugin to go get your Ulamog. So just another tutor effect in the deck, affecting the consistency of it. It's a land, so you can go Sylvan Scrying it, you can go Expedition Map it. Um, Another
it's
land that,
just a way of keeping the pressure on, isn't it?
yeah,
mm.
absolutely. Because, I mean, a lot of decks have ways to deal with the first threat. And it's usually the second or the third threat that grabs the toehold and shifts the game. Another mention of the Kamigawa lands, Beseju, shows up in this deck as well. Another
Mm-hmm.
good Sylvan Scrying target, another good Expedition Map target.
Such a stupid
Blows up
card.
those Blood Moons.
Yeah, it's such a stupid card. It really is.
Those platinum
Honestly,
Imperions.
Those Platinum
oh,
Empyreans.
just being able to destroy something through a counter spell, like you know, it breaks all the laws.
I really think that we're in need of some sort of playable stifle
Mm.
coming up soon because like we've
Just
got a lot of
stifle. Just we need stifle. Like we've
that
got
may be the
Plague
only
Deck.
I
way.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to disagree with you guys. I've played a decent bit of Legacy, in order to
Mhm.
be able to tell you're much happier to have Beseiju in the format than Stifle. I have played the format and it is just the worst feeling not being able to fetch if your opponent has just one blue mana open.
Mm,
I mean, getting Shadow of Doubt in,
Oh yeah, that's true.
it's like a blowout, but it's like fine. But the fact that your opponent is able to just no matter what you do, be like one step ahead of you, um, Stifle really it defines Legacy in a certain sense. I don't mind that being a thing, but it is a miserable card to have in the format. And I don't think Modern wants to be as miserable as it can be in Legacy, because Delver of Secrets is one of the reasons it's a good deck for such a long time. I mean, yes, it's actually dates, but Stifle being the able to just be like, oh yeah, I turn one play to land, you didn't play land because I stifled your fetch, haha, funny. It's really bad. Like
okay, okay.
I'd say,
Oh right.
One
So,
last thing for
oh,
Tron. Um, just another land from War of the Spark that um, that set was so broken.
yeah.
So many good things for older formats came out of that, and Blast Zone is one of them.
hmm
If you ever wanted engineered explosives as a land,
you got
I got you.
it.
I got you.
It's
Yeah.
sorry, but
The
you gotta.
I'll be honest. The first card that came to my head with regards to this one, it wasn't EE because EE you have to kind of pre-prepare, prepay, how many counters it has on it. It was actually Ratchet Bomb.
Ah.
This was a Ratchet Bomb on a land rather than an EE. Um, and I always liked that idea because I used to play Ratchet Bomb in the sideboard of a couple of
Mm-hmm.
decks that I played. As just an easy board wipe for tribal decks.
Yeah, I think Scratch is about to bring up an interesting point about Blast Zone, though.
I think a very important part about this is everyone likes to compare it to those cards, but one major difference is when you're playing against a token-based deck strategy. I mean, yes, against something like Hammer Time, it really is good at wiping them at 1 mana. But the fact that it just is not able to hit the 0 drops because it enters with at least one counter, it makes
Mhm.
a huge difference in how the card is able to be played. which I think
Mm.
you should not overlook.
Absolutely.
Yeah, yeah. The fact that it enters with one counter, yeah, that is a really important point, actually. Interestingly, just a weird like rules question. If you blood moon something, sorry, if you blood moon this land, does it take the counter off, or does the
No,
counter stay on?
the counters stay on it,
Hmm.
just like if you had
Yeah,
a creature land that is returned to a land state, the counter never
yeah,
gets removed. The thing is, though, when it enters the battlefield during an effect where lands lose abilities similar to like Blood Sun or Blood Moon,
yeah.
this land would not enter with a counter on it.
Yeah, so because what's just occurred to me is that if you played this land under a blood sun or under a blood moon, it would enter with no counters on it. So then
Um,
technically, it would be an EE or a ratchet bomb.
the problem at that point is though that you're facing a Blood Sun or a Blood Moon, which is more likely to
Oh yeah, of
kind of
course. Just from a rules perspective, it's just
yeah.
interesting. I'd never thought of it before, but
Oh no,
yeah.
it's absolutely a
Um,
valid play. I have seen times when this has been relevant.
That is Mono Green Tron. It's a deck that, whilst I personally despise, it is relatively cheap to build. Does anyone have any idea how much? Who can make the closest guess as to how much it would currently cost to build, uh, Tron as it is at the moment?
I'm guessing 600, according to Goldfish. 600 is what I'm guessing.
Six. Oh, so
I
you've
was
already
gonna
looked.
I saw it a couple
Okay.
of days ago.
I
I'm
was
sorry.
I was gonna say something like 759, something like that,
Yeah.
depending on the build.
So, so we're talking $650, euros, pounds. What are we
Well,
talking?
I would go depending on where you're living. So I'd go with Goldfish in the U.S. It's not the best always, but I feel like Goldfish has a rough guesstimate of maybe to tell you what price it is. If you're wanting to figure out what it would be in Europe, I definitely. The problem with Europe is you'd have to do like a buy order on Card Market to be able to more efficiently say what deck price is,
Yeah.
because you can't transfer the English prices to German, not German, the Card Market prices
Hmm.
because they can vary sometimes. Like the March of Otherworldly Light is not that expensive on Card Market, hella expensive in on Goldfish. Like sometimes there are just cards that are just a little less
Yeah.
expensive or a little bit more expensive. Like Luris was more expensive in Card Market, less in the US. I'm just trying to say like there's multiple different formulas.
Yeah. Like they are two very different markets, aren't they? The US market for cards and the European market. Um, One important thing to note for our British listeners is that uh, since Brexit, we've had to start paying a little bit more money to buy cards from Europe. So yeah, thank you very much for that, Boris Johnson. Um, but yeah, so that's something to be aware of. But nice. Okay, so you said 600 and what? Sorry, scratch.
I was assuming it was around 600 because I remember looking it up a couple of days ago and it was somewhere around the 600 mark.
600 and what? What? 600 and what? Pounds? Dollars?
I was gonna go with dollars because I'm going with the NDG
Dollars.
Goldfish is what I'm assuming.
Right. Okay, so it's in dollars. So there we go. So, um, and I'd say that that's. It sounds like a lot, um, but I think you also have to remember that you can resale these cards. They do have a resale value. So if you're able to invest to start with, um, yeah, it's definitely something to consider because you can just resell. Um,
And
if
that's one
you
of
run
the
into
better selling points for Tron specifically is that it has had such a long time presence in the format
yeah,
that it's not going anywhere.
no,
It doesn't very often have any new cards added to it as well, so the cost of upkeep is relatively low.
hmm,
This deck was one of the powerhouses of the format already, and then it got Karn. And honestly, it hasn't really seen much since Karn added to the list.
Yeah.
Mycos Inflatus was the card we were alluding to earlier that
Oh
led
yes.
to a banhammer
Yeah.
situation. But since that card hit the hammer, I'm taking a look at this list I've pulled up for the
There,
purpose of sharing the cards, and I don't see anything
there
recent.
actually is a new card. There is actually a new card that came out relatively recently, and I believe it was another War of the Spark special. Golos, the Tireless
Ah,
Children,
Golos. Yeah.
and the Chromatic Orrery, which I think was I want to say M20,
It was M21.
M21. Right. So those two cards have been showing up more recently. Interestingly, I saw a Tron deck recently that was playing Chancellor of the Annex
Mm.
Huh.
in the main.
Oh, oh wow.
That's spicy.
That's hella
Yeah.
spicy.
Let me bring
Uh,
that up for the viewers.
the it was at the SCG Dallas, and it was the
Mm.
most successful Tron deck there.
I have to quickly. I quickly looked it up on Goldfish. Tron is at about 700, so I guess Antog was a bit closer.
Mm. But having said that, like the money card, I think the reason it's gone up to 700 is because of cards like Beseju.
Hmm.
Mm, definitely, yeah.
Um, like you don't have to have Beseju.
Yeah.
You can run Nature's Claims in the side. You can run Wilt in the
Hmm.
side. There are lots of things that you can get that are cheaper replacements for things like Beseju and I guess is there anything else that's like considered access to requirements in the deck?
Not not really. I mean, everything else as far as all of the extra cards are pretty essential to the
Mm,
strategy. They've kind of hit that point where they're all auto includes, but Beseju is one of those cards that you can kind of get around.
mm,
Yeah.
And numbers always vary. Some people aren't playing very many Karn the Great Creators, and they're kind of pushing towards things like Sundering Titan
Hmm.
as finishers. Um,
Mm.
so there's definitely
So,
some play in the price of the deck.
mm. And so, of course, if you have a build of Tron that is at all different or spicy, of course, we do want to hear about it. Please let us know on Twitter or Instagram. We will also be starting up a TikTok channel, and we will be starting up a YouTube channel as things progress. It is at snake_eyes_ntg. Um, Please let us know if you have any spicy tech for Tron, because we would like to hear about it. And so we kind of come to a conclusion here. Now, we have one last little section, and this is Snake Eyes Asks. Um, Now, Snake Eyes Asks is we ask you guys to talk to us because we like talking to people who listen to us. So, um, for this week, we have a Snake Eyes Asks, and it is again on our Twitter and our Instagram. Um, so it is there on the right of the screen. Snake Eyes asks what the best 2 mana spell is in Modern. Um, so, uh, of course, I think I've mentioned this on Twitter already. I already know Scratch's answer, and it's going to be probably Remand because he's a bit odd like that. But that's what floats his boat. That's his cup of tea. Um, am I wrong in saying that, Scratch?
I think definitely Remand, Counterspell, and Snap are my favorites. I have a hard time choosing between the three. These are all, in my opinion, just some of the best cards in
Yeah.
blue. I just love all of them.
Typical blue player, of course. Um, no imagination, just counter spell, like you know.
I mean, I would have said Cryptic, but we are not at 4 mana.
That's basically Scratch's favourite cards are Counterspell, another type of Counterspell, and a card that can flashback Counterspell. So,
And Sphinx
yeah.
Revelation.
Um, and how about you, Anthony? What do you think?
Honestly, like there are so many good 2 mana spells in Modern. We could talk about Red and Six. We could talk about Tarmogoyf. We could talk about so many things. But honestly, I got to get my flag behind Manamorphose. That card is
So,
everywhere.
tell us what does Manamorphose do?
All right, so for a hybrid red green and one generic, you can at instant speed add 2 mana of any combination of colors to your mana pool, and you draw a card. So not only is it a cantrip in that it replaces itself, it also replaces itself on mana. So it adds
Mhm.
one to the storm count. Say you have only a green and a generic, you can then use Manamorphose to get a black and a red to cast that Death Shadow or that Lightning Bolt that you were really trying to cast earlier. Manamorphose adds that extra number to the storm count for my favorite deck in the format, Blue Red Storm. So it just is, to me, the power level of Modern at 2 mana.
Yeah. For me, I'm going to go with my mid-range heart here, and I'm going to say that it's Tarmogoyf is my personal favourite 2 mana spell in Modern. Um, I played it in a deck called Jund mid-range, and it never let me down. I was never unhappy to see it. I also played a Death Shadow variant of the deck. So Death Shadow is a very, very powerful 1 drop in the right deck. Um, and yeah, like Tarmogoyf was just a defensive beast. It would sit there and make a massive blocker, whilst Death Shadow would go ahead and just wreck people, you know. So it was just such a fantastic 2 drop, and it's now super, super, super cheap. I don't know if you have seen on NTGO, Magic the Gathering online, but we looked today and Tarmogoyf was available for $2.50 on Magic the Gathering online, which I was shocked at. Yeah, we looked at it on, I forgot, was it Mana Traders? And yeah, it was super cheap. Like, wow. I remember when that thing was £100, $100, $100 a card.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah. Jund
and
was my second deck in Modern. I traded the
yeah,
Chalices from my Merfolk deck to get Tarmogoyf because I opened one in a side event draft, the first reprint of Tarmogoyf. I forget which one it was. So I cracked one and decided that, you know what? It's time. We got to leave the fishies behind. Let's
yeah,
bow to our mid range lords for a little
yeah.
bit.
Good. Glad to hear it. Um, well, this has been Pioneering Modern. Of course, thank you for listening. If you've made it this far, please do let us know what you think. We are, of course, all happy to hear your constructive complaining. That's absolutely fine. So please send us a tweet on at snake underscore eyes underscore mtg, and let us know what you think. Thank you very, very much for being here. And yeah, I'll see you guys next time.
Awesome. Been fun talking. We'll see you guys.
Take care, everybody.
talking about Mycosynth Lattice, I had one player tell me about a legacy game they had is because Mycosynth Lattice also has the text that not all, not just everything's an artifact, also that all mana is can be used for any color. Somebody in response to this Mycosynth Lattice of their opponent, they tapped for two colorless, and then the Mycosynth Lattice resolved, and then with the two colorless, he cast Hercule's Recall and returned all permanents of his opponent back to his hand, and just absolutely just destroyed.
That's great.